everyone. Welcome to the weekly recap. My name is Corie Bobechko, and today with Bible Discovery and Bible Discovery TV, we are looking at our assigned reading for this first week of January. We're kicking the year off right. We're reading through the Bible in its entirety this year. So we are covering Genesis 1 through 25. But it's not just me this year. This year, I have also invited my husband along. Hey, Matlock.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here too.
We'll see how this goes.
We'll see. I know. It's different. I haven't done the recap with another person yet.
Yeah.
So this should be interesting.
Just gotta chime in here and there. And
please do.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Please do.
All right.
Okay. So Genesis chapter 1. So this is this classic creation chapter in the beginning, right? So the first thing that God creates is light. He separates the light from the darkness here in chapter 1. Then he creates the sky. He on day 3, he gathers the waters together to make dry land and water, like ocean versus land, and also vegetation on day 3. On day 4, he creates the sun, moon, and stars. On day 5, he creates the water creatures like fish, etc., and birds, the flying things in the air. On chapter 6, he creates animals, bugs, insects, living creatures, so animals, and man. We're told that he makes man in the image of God.
Right.
He makes them male and female in the image of God. He tells them to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and rule. Okay, chapter 2, we get the 7th day of creation, which it's kind of cheating because it doesn't do anything. On the day 7, he rests. God rests on the 7th day. And it's talking about how he inaugurated the Sabbath. So the Sabbath day rest and made it holy. Then the creation in chapter 2 repeats itself, the creation of the world, but this time from the perspective of humans.
Right.
So it talks about, God putting Adam in the garden and having him name the animals, and he gives them the rule about the only tree that he's not allowed to eat from, which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then we get the account of how Eve is created from Adam, or woman is created from man, I should say. Chapter 3 is the classic fall of Adam and Eve. So we've got a serpent who tells some lies to Eve. Eve believes these lies, eats the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. She chooses to disobey God in that way. And Adam, who was with her apparently through this temptation, ate as well. So God confronts Adam and Eve. They're scared of God for the first time. They try to clothe themselves because they're naked and they're embarrassed. And God doles out consequences for the sin. So he gives the serpent consequences, the woman consequences, and the man consequences. And that essentially wraps up the story of creation in the Bible, or the account of creation in the Bible. God also clothes Adam and Eve. I should
And that's important.
That
Actually, the clothing motif is really huge for the rest of Scripture.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it is. Especially because when you get into the New Testament, it talks about being clothed in the righteousness of Christ.
Right.
Christians being clothed in Christ.
Right.
Which is very interesting when you think back to Genesis chapter 3, where the sin of Adam and Eve made them naked and God had to clothe them. So it ties in with salvation, definitely. All right, did you want to get into the creation, evolution?
We can talk about it briefly. I know we are short on time, and you can't really delve into it very deeply.
Yes.
But I know that, this is one of the big debates at the time because
it is.
Right, and it actually causes a huge conflict of faith in a lot of people. As if Genesis is wrong, then your entire faith is off, right? There's nothing to believe. God is wrong, and everything just kind of collapses from there. And it really comes down to how you understand Genesis is not the same thing as Genesis. And,
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, right. Because it's like you could have an understanding of it, and your understanding could be wrong. That doesn't mean Genesis itself is wrong.
Right. So you're trying to say there is a truth.
Yes.
There is a truth here of what happened in Genesis. The creation of the world happened. Yes. There is a truth of how it happened, and it's recorded here in Genesis. But your idea of what Genesis means is not necessarily the truth.
That's right. And so you have this like strange dichotomy that's formed, because in the midst of this you have young earth creationism, and the extreme end you have just naturalistic evolution. Then right in the middle you have theistic evolution.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when the arguments kind of come up against evolution. Now, I'm not an evolutionist, but when the arguments do come up against evolution, there's some conflation that kind of happens there against a theistic evolution. So, for example, if we come from slime, then we'll act like slime.
But it's a good soundbite, though.
It's a good soundbite, but it doesn't actually work with theistic evolutionists because we all believe we came from dirt. Therefore, do we act like dirt? Well, no, if God's behind the picture. So that argument works for naturalism only. It doesn't apply.
For those who don't believe that that the God of the Bible was actually behind the process.
That's right.
Because that makes all the difference. Like, who is what is the origin of the soul? What is it that makes us human? And I think both old Earth creationists and theistic evolutionists and young Earth creationists think the same thing. It's the whole image of God. It's the spiritual element. It's the breath that God blew into the body of Adam that determines our worth as humans and our value.
Yeah, that's right. There's been kind of like a conflict here at heart that if Genesis is not exactly how it's painted out to be in the way I've been taught, then somehow you're a lesser Christian,
right?
Or a weaker Christian.
Yeah, that's what really bothers me is seeing the way that people treat each other in public forums who have different ideas than them,
right?
Especially in Christian circles. I mean, is there a more animosity other than exists between young Earth creationists and theistic evolutionists? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just the most outspoken.
Yeah.
Like two groups of them. But on the one hand, young Earth creation tends to say like this isn't a salvation issue, but then the way they talk about theistic evolutionists as like enemies of the faith and sometimes even false teachers, and it leaves you going, wait a second, that means you don't think they're saved if they're enemies of the faith, and false teachers. And then on the other hand of the spectrum, sometimes you hear theistic evolutionists saying things like young Earth creationists are embarrassing, they're fools, they're dragging the name of Christianity through the mud, they're uneducated.
Right.
It's just wild. It's wild how the church is okay to divide over an issue that isn't an essential belief for salvation. And I just want to encourage everyone to, God's given us the ministry of reconciliation. He's forgiven us. So why can't we forgive other people who believe differently than us? I think that we need to have grace with each other and understand that, God doesn't give us all the answers to the mystery of the world, and just like encourage you. There is a truth that is here in Genesis, and I think it is worth debating. I think it's worth talking about, but not if we can't be gracious and we can't be loving to other people.
Yeah.
In that case, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't think it's worth it. I obviously I am very dedicated to the reality of Scripture. I'm dedicated to the importance of Scripture. I'm dedicated to trying to understand the intention of Scripture. What is Genesis 1-3 trying to tell me?
Right.
I know that God is creator. I believe that he created in 7 days. I believe that Adam and Eve were literal people and that they fell.
Right.
Like they literally sinned against, they actually in the flesh sinned against God. That is my personal belief. And I think that those are very important beliefs. But I don't want to be reduced to a divider of the church over stuff like this. So I just think we have to be really careful because we're hot-blooded.
Yeah.
Humans are hot-blooded. You're going to hear about in the next chapter.
There's a lot left out of Genesis 1. There in 2 and 3. There's a lot left out. So however, how God did the initial design with the animals, like there's a huge distinction between animals and humans here. Like you, I'm not an evolutionist. I believe that in a recent historical Adam, I think that's actually necessary. I don't think you can bend that. But with that said, there's a lot of room here for understanding how the animals were developed. How did this whole process happen?
Yeah.
We're also to take into account, regardless of the logic behind it and what makes more compatible sense, we are growing up in a different culture, and grace should be the underpinning all of our actions. And mercy.
This is a very ancient book.
Right, yeah. Mercy and grace should be underpinning everyone.
Yes.
For everyone's sake, as opposed to just being like, oh, you're dead wrong, anathema. Like, you're out of here.
Yes, you need to be really careful not to make that mistake.
Because at some point we end up speaking on God's behalf.
And we are in constant danger of making our ideas idols.
Right.
And what I mean by that is if there's something that I believe about the Bible that without that belief, like if it turns out that God did use evolution to create the world, if I wouldn't serve God because of that, that's an idol for me. At that point, young earth creationism has become an idol for me because I don't get to tell God how he does stuff.
Yeah.
He gets to tell me how he did it. Right. So I personally, I'm not an evolutionist, obviously, but I'm also not a biologist or a geneticist or anything in the scientific field like that. But I think we just have to be careful because we're always in danger of holding our own ideas or interpretations as mini gods in our own minds, which means that we're gods in our own minds because we're determining what the truth is. So there's an element of humility that I think we have to have in these matters. And I think we should still very deeply think through Genesis 1-3. So I'm not saying it doesn't matter.
No, I know.
We just have to be careful that our faith doesn't rise or fall based off of our interpretation of Genesis.
That's right.
Which we're in danger of doing.
Yeah, and teaching other people of doing as well.
Yes.
That if, I even seen it where if the snake doesn't speak, if it's like, let's say, if the snake, wasn't a physical snake, but it represented like Satan, right, in some sort of form, that even that is pagan, an idea. And it's like, well, hold on a second.
We just have to be careful.
We just have to be careful here.
There's red flags here to be careful.
Yeah, just be careful. And humility, mercy, grace, like these are the things that we're about. And we have to be firm on what we know, what is necessary. We have to be firm on that. Yeah. But then when we know that, listen, we're not God, as it says in Job, you weren't there when I made the foundations of the world, right? Tell me about it. He's all cynical to Job. Yes. So he's like, so just be very careful.
Go ahead, Job. Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Job's like, no can do, God.
Yeah, that's right.
No can do.
So just be very careful. That's it. Caution should never be thrown to the wind.
We need to, unity in diversity is okay within Christianity. We see it in the first century church.
Yeah.
When Paul's like, look, you have different ideas about holy days and eating meat sacrificed to idols, but be united. Yeah. Stop fighting over things like this and be united.
And pray for each other. I don't think
pray for each other.
Often it's like, you're an idiot, you're a bigot, and they'll just like, it's kind of like this big banter.
Man, when you start praying for someone really, like actually, it humanizes them in such a way that it's not as easy to call them an idiot anymore.
They're not just the idea of evolution.
They're not just them. Yeah. They are a human being with thoughts and emotions and a pathway that led them to their belief.
That's right.
That you may not understand. Okay.
We can talk about this all night.
I think we've ranted about that enough. Yeah. We had to move on. So Genesis 4, Eve has Cain and Abel. And when they grow up, Abel is a shepherd and Cain is a farmer. And Cain ends up murdering Abel because they bring their offerings to God, and God does not accept Cain's offering, but he does accept Abel's offering, the secondborn. And Cain is very angry, and God warns Cain, look, sin is crouching at your door, and its desire is to master you, but you must master it. Cain doesn't listen, and he murders his brother out of hate and anger. God confronts Cain and banishes him from the ground, which is his profession, right? He's a farmer. And Cain is really, really grieved over this. And he says, he says things like, now I'm going to be hidden from your presence, and anyone who finds me is going to kill me. So presumably, I'll get into that after, but God ends up marking Cain for safety. And Cain, he can't do anything. So what he does is he establishes the City of Enoch. And this makes sense because if he can't farm the ground himself, he's going to establish a city with walls and like facilities for other people to come and they can farm, right? So this idea of people working together. Then there's the story of Cain's descendants, which is not great. We're also told of Adam and Eve's next son named Seth,
right?
Or the next son they have after Abel's death. So they probably have other children.
Yeah.
But after Abel dies, when he's an adult, the next son that they have is Seth. And at this point, people begin to call on the name of the Lord. So up until then, it seems like God's appearing and speaking to them like he did with Cain.
Yes.
right? So at this point, that stops happening. Genesis chapter 5, this is the genealogy of Adam to Noah. There's some really interesting highlights in there. Methuselah, who lives like 969 years. Noah has his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth when he's 500 years old, according to Genesis chapter 5. In Genesis chapter 6, we hear about the Nephilim, which are a main reason why God wants to destroy the earth through a flood. The Nephilim appear to be children that fallen angels or demonic forces have with human women. So they're these weird hybrid beings.
Right.
And so Noah gets a message at this point from God that he needs to build an ark because God is going to flood the world.
Right.
Anything you want to talk about yet?
Well, we can talk about the Nephilim, but that might take a while.
Oh my gosh, I think that might be a whole other video.
Yeah, we talked a little bit too much, I think, with the Christian evolution.
I think so too.
All
Maybe we'll have time at the end. Let's
Yeah.
keep going with the recap,
All
and
right,
we'll see.
sounds
That'll
good.
be next. Oh, about the ages of the people before
Yeah.
the flood and after the flood. You know, they're clearly older before the flood and younger after the flood. There is an ancient cultural example of this in the Sumerians' Kings List, except it's way inflated.
Like 30,000. Some guys are like 30.
Tens of
50,
thousands
yeah,
of
tens
years.
of thousands, yeah.
But it follows the same pattern where kings before the flood, the worldwide flood, live a really long time. Then there's the flood, and then people have less of a lifespan after the flood. There could be a mathematical thing going on here, especially in the Sumerian Kings List, because all of the length of the reigns are divisible by a certain number that's escaping me right now.
Right.
But in the Bible, that doesn't appear to be the case. They're more realistic numbers. They're lower numbers. I don't know how realistic they are according to today's experiences.
Right.
But it does seem to be indicating actual ages. Perhaps they were calculating their years a little bit differently than us. That would make a
Yeah.
difference, but it wouldn't fully, even if you had like years that were only 300 days long or 200 days long, when you get to 969 years, that's still way too old for our life expectancy today.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting here too is for a lot of people who are trying to throw out Genesis 1 to 11, trying to make it myth
Yeah.
or just figurative or folklore, this genealogy is what ties Genesis 1 to 11 to history.
It does.
Yeah, so it's like you can't even break. So if you're trying to make
Yeah.
it non-historical, you can't because the genealogy. And you because they can't. No one can figure out an alternative to the ages because obviously people today don't live to be 1,000.
Right.
So or like 900.
This is like a favorite of people being like, oh, it's mythological.
That's right.
Even though it's couched historically.
That's right.
It's like, or when God created us, our genetics were better. Our genetic makeup was better, so we lived a lot longer, and then it
right,
rapidly
and
changed.
that's it. Because
perhaps with the genetic bottleneck of like coming from Noah, we had less genetic diversity.
Right.
Perhaps with a worldwide flood, it changed the environment. It changed our food sources.
Well, that's right. Because with this too, there is no like the numbers aren't. They say they could be symbolic, the numbers, but because they gradually decline.
Yeah.
So well, all the way to Joseph, who lives to like 110.
Yeah.
Right? It just keeps going down, and even Abraham, that it's like there's no way to really make it like, oh, even if it was a calendar difference, okay, how is it gradually, coming down like this?
Yeah.
Right, 100 years at a time coming down so almost so perfectly that it makes it very difficult to see it anything other than just being lifespans. But yeah, it's interesting.
You can't escape the miraculous when you're looking at the Bible. That's the thing.
No,
That's the
can't.
uncomfortable truth of, I think it's only uncomfortable in our culture today.
Right.
The other cultures and other times have been comfortable with the miraculous, but we're just not. But that's okay. We're not, the Bible's not here to make us comfortable. It's here to change us, right?
That's right.
Okay. Genesis chapter 7. So the ark is made. Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives go into the ark along with 7 pairs, male and female, of every kind of clean animal and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal. And then that's the beginning of the flood. Genesis chapter 8, the water of the flood begins to recede. The flood has been 150 days altogether. Right. The ark rests on the mountains of Ararat, which is probably in the Turkey area. Modern day Turkey, obviously. God calls them out of the ark. There's the whole releasing of the birds to see if there's any land. Very clever. The family of Noah sacrifices to God. They build an altar and sacrifice once they get out of the ark. And God makes a covenant, he makes a promise to never curse the ground or destroy all living creatures in a flood ever again.
Mm-hmm.
Genesis chapter 9, there's this covenant with Noah, and again, a be fruitful and multiply blessing. So similar to that he gave to Adam and Eve. But this time, rather than taking care of the animals like Adam and Eve were supposed to do, the animals will now be afraid of mankind. And permission to eat meat is given here in Genesis chapter 9. However, they're commanded not to eat blood.
Right.
Because blood is a symbol of life.
This is like in terms of a narrative, it's like a complete contrast to how the initial creation was. Because the world was created by water and through water. And then here, now it's been destroyed and trying to be remade to this new creation, quote unquote, new creation process. But now you're killing the animals as taking care of them. And it's just a very different world. But it's supposed to parallel it.
And lest we think that this fresh start was truly a fresh start, still in Genesis chapter 9, we see the sons of Noah and the grandson of Noah. Noah gets drunk, and there's this whole weird incident where they see him naked and something weird happens. We're not sure exactly what it is, but Noah ends up cursing his grandson. So he was involved in this incident somehow. So much like Cain and Abel, the second generation from Adam and Eve, from that start of humanity, they fell so quick.
Right.
Same here with this restart of humanity. Right away in that second generation and that third generation, we see signs that it's not going well.
Right.
Genesis chapter 10 is the table of nations. So this is recording the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons. Genesis chapter 11, the first few verses talk about the Tower of Babel. The people want to... we get this idea that there are people spreading across the earth, but there's one group of people that gathers together and decide that they're going to build some sort of massive tower to make a name for themselves so that they won't be spread all over the place. And what ends up happening is God confuses their languages, and they end up having to scatter across the earth because they can't understand each other anymore.
Right.
And it goes from Shem's line then to Abraham in Ur, this man named Abram in Ur.
Right.
In Genesis chapter 11. Shall I keep going?
Yeah.
Or is there anything that you want to say?
With Babel, it's pretty well known that it was a matter of pride is the reason why.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be like God. And that's just recorded more so in like other texts. But yeah.
Well, even in Genesis, it does. Keep talking.
Yeah, no.
I gotta get there. I was looking at my other notes.
Yeah, so it does talk about, it hints at it. I know it's kind of understood like to make a name for themselves.
So we make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth, but they've just been commanded to spread out
the
on
other
the face of the earth.
Narrative parallel here is that after when Cain left, he builds a city for himself. And here you have Nimrod, another hunter, building a name for himself.
Yeah.
So you have this, building, not a name, but a name for himself, but making a city for himself. So it's not this whole structure with cities here are kind of viewed with, are kind of viewed in a negative light.
Yeah. Yes.
Not in and of itself.
Yeah.
But they're being used as a typographical way. Right. Okay. Anyways, long story short is that there's something happening there with the narrative structure between Cain and Nimrod and just habits and stuff.
Human pride versus God. Never goes well. Okay, Genesis chapter 12. What has really gone on in Genesis so far is that God has given us an origin story for humanity. And he's given us a promise that he's going to save humanity from our original downfall. Remember in Genesis 3, we've got the messianic prophecy that there will be a Messiah to redeem all of mankind. And then we see how mankind has really gone far away from God, from his original purpose for us. We are now originators of evil rather than defenders of the earth from evil, which was part of our original purpose. Now we're creating evil on the earth. And so out of this cesspool of gross humanity, God calls a man and his family, Abram. So we have the call of Abram in Genesis 12.
Right. And so I know there's some scholars who are like, well, why include Genesis? Yeah, everyone's trying to get rid of Genesis 1 to 11.
No one likes
No, apparently. Well, I like it, but
Well,
we
I
like
know.
it. We like it. But all these scholars are like, no, like, I guess they're liberal, whatever it is. Some people just don't really want to deal with it because of, what science is saying. A lot of the scientists are saying. But long story short, they asked, okay, so why is Genesis 1 to 11 in there? And it's because through this part here, through the call of Abraham, God intends to bless all nations.
Yeah.
And all nations start with Adam,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like from Adam do all nations come out. And so that's really important because the gospel is grounded here in Genesis. And it can't be dismissed despite what everyone wants,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's integral to the rest of the text all the way to the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Vitally important. I'm just going to throw that in there.
Sure.
Yeah, why not?
Sure.
Why not?
Okay, so God calls Abram to leave his people. He says, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram goes to Canaan. He travels through the land. He ends up going to Egypt in chapter 12 because there's a famine in the land. And he lies about his wife, Sarah, who later becomes Sarah, because he's afraid that they're going to kill him to take Sarah. So he's like, it's safer if I'm just your brother.
It's a half lie because
she's a half sister.
Half sister, yeah.
But this is
it's
like
still a lie,
he's
yeah.
afraid.
Yeah.
He's afraid that he wouldn't be able to resist attacks from Pharaoh because he's going there to get help from a famine. So he's at like a lower position.
At heart, it's deception because it's clearly
Total deception.
Because it's about him it's not about him being his sister. It's about him not having a wife.
Yes. And what's interesting here is that even though Abraham does the wrong thing here, God protects Sarah.
Right.
So even though she's failed to be protected from Abram, God's like, no, like she's going to be the mother of the nation of Israel.
Right.
Whether or not they like it.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. Okay, Genesis chapter 13, Lot and Abraham separate after the famine. So Lot is Abraham's nephew that he brought with him out of Ur. They separate because both of their households have grown significantly, and now their shepherds are kind of fighting with one another over pasture and water. Lot chooses the plain of Jordan, including by the Dead Sea, that was apparently well watered at that time. It is not today, but apparently at that time it was well watered. And Abraham settles near the city of Hebron. Genesis chapter 14, there's this big war with allied kings and cities, and Lot gets swept away. And honestly, at this point, I remember when I was first reading this as a teenager, being a little bit miffed at Sunday school, because in Sunday school, I grew up in the church, and at Sunday school, Abraham was always pictured as this like grandfatherly, old, gentle soul. He is not.
No.
He is not. We get here, and Abraham, it makes sense because he's a traveling merchant. He has 300 men in his household, and they are trained fighting men, just as Abraham is trained in warfare. And they go in, and using military tactics, and hand-to-hand combat, they rescue Lot and his household from this army of allied kings, 318 men. From Abraham's household that he leads in battle. And what's interesting about this is that when he comes back from battle, we see this Melchizedek, king of Salem figure, who's called the priest of God Most High. And Abraham gives him a tithe. He gives him a tenth of everything captured from the enemy. And that's that.
Yeah, and then Melchizedek brings up bread and wine, which is what? Which is communion.
It is.
It is, which is really interesting.
It is. And so we're going to see Melchizedek pop up in the book of Hebrews.
Yes.
When Hebrews relates Jesus' role as a priest of God, but still legitimate, even though he's not
a Levite.
Yeah,
right.
He's still a legitimate priest like Melchizedek was a legitimate priest, though he was not even related to Abraham.
That's right.
Right? Okay, Genesis chapter 15, we've got God makes a covenant with Abraham where he promises a son. And this is where we're told that Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. So Abraham believes him at this point. And then there is this weird covenant ceremony where the animals are cut in half, and basically it is attested to in ancient history where people would make covenants with each other. And the idea of cutting the animal in half and passing through them is, may what happened to these animals happen to me if I fail to live up to this covenant.
And then
so
you
that's
have that
just
theophany of the torch going through, and it does it. Yeah, right.
Yes,
cool.
The smoking fire pot, the blazing torch that God shows Abraham going through it. God is symbolized as that, which is really interesting. Genesis chapter 16, Hagar and Ishmael. So Sarai and Abram have been given this promise that they're going to have a child, but it's not happening. So Sarai uses her maidservant like a surrogate mother, but it goes wrong because Hagar does have a male child named Ishmael, but instead of just allowing him to be Sarah's legal child, Hagar starts maneuvering herself as the wife rather than Sarai. So it doesn't go great, but God ends up saving both Hagar and Ishmael and tells her, go back to Abram and Sarah and just submit to Sarah. Genesis chapter 17, we get the covenant of circumcision, where God tells Abraham that all the males in your household now will be circumcised as a physical sign of the covenant. This is where they also get renamed Sarah and Abraham, rather than Sarai and Abraham. Abraham laughs at the idea of Sarah at 90 years old having a baby and asks for God to bless Ishmael instead. So everyone's always like, Sarah laughed. Abraham laughed too, guys. When you look at the text, he laughs at the idea of Sarah at 90 years old having a baby. He could still have a baby. He just has to have a young woman with a working uterus. He does later after Sarah dies. But it was a little bit ridiculous for the idea of a 90-year-old woman in menopause to have a baby. But God's like, nope, it's going to happen. In Genesis chapter 18, God appears to Abraham in the form of 3 visitors. We've got 2 angels and a manifestation of God, which is crazy. Sarah and Abraham obviously know that this is God by the way the amount of food that they make for him. When you do the math, it's a ridiculous amount of bread that they make, these 3 men, using like 36 pounds of flour. So we know that they know that these are more than just 3 men coming to visit. This is the chapter where Sarah laughs. Ha ha ha! I'm gonna have a baby. Ha ha ha! So she laughs too.
And God's like, no, but you did laugh.
You did laugh. You did laugh. I didn't laugh. Yes, you did. Yeah. Yes, you did. I probably laughed too. Goodness gracious. Perhaps out of fear.
Yeah.
I would, not Sarah. Hers was incredulity. But. Okay, so God then tells Abraham in chapter 18 here about Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham barters with God for the survival of Sodom and Gomorrah, eventually giving up because there's no righteous men in the city other than Lot. In Genesis chapter 19, the two angels, so the manifestation of God is talking with Abraham, and the 2 angels go into the city of Sodom. Lot sitting at the gate. He recognizes them. They want to spend the night in the public square, and Lot's like, no, that's not a good idea. No. Come into my house. So he brings them into his house, and then the men of the city want to gang rape the men. It's very brutal. Lot is like, no, have my daughters, which is terrible.
Yeah, it's terrible.
This whole situation is demonstrating to us the depravity of mankind.
And what's really interesting too is Abraham knows that these were angels, whereas the people of Sodom and Gomorrah do not. They don't recognize it. They just look like men.
Yeah.
Right? And in fact, they want to gang rape them. But like Abraham recognizes them as something other, something different. They're not men. And Lot, I think, also sees that as well. And so that's really interesting is that like the people who are living by faith and righteousness see something different in things that look ordinary. If people are looking at life carnally, they won't see it in something that's, that might look every day to them. Anyways, I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, so the angels end up saving Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters. But as they're leaving, because God's going to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities as well, because it was the alliances of these cities were just so terribly evil. Lot's wife looks back and turns into a pillar of salt.
Right.
So she dies because of this. Lot and his daughters eventually go to live in the mountains, and for some reason, Lot doesn't come out. He's staying in the mountains. So his daughters, wanting to carry on their family name, get him drunk, and have children by him, which is
Moabites and the Ammonites.
Yeah, which is really messed up. And again, this is just showing the depravity of mankind, and it's showing where our decisions lead. But I think the most important thing, when you take a step back and you ask yourself the question, why is this account even in here? There are many reasons why the account's in here, but one of the main ones is to show that God's process of bringing about a Messiah and a nation from that Messiah to come from. He wants mankind to be in a relationship with him. He wanted Abraham to discourse with him, to talk with him about his judgment that was coming on Sodom and Gomorrah. He allowed Abraham to be a part of that conversation. And Lot was saved perhaps not because of, would Lot have been saved if not for Abraham? These are questions that we don't know.
Abraham has saved him a bunch of times. Yeah.
And this is part of that. We're seeing that blessing already, where Abraham says, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. Well, Lot did bless Abraham, and so he's saved. So this is really interesting stuff.
I think so too.
Okay, Genesis chapter 20. Abimelech, the king of Gerar, again. Abraham lies and says that Sarah is his sister, like back in chapter 12. Abimelech actually takes Sarah as his wife, but has her in a period of transition. So he hasn't touched her yet. When God comes to Abimelech in a dream and tells him the truth, and he says, Abraham's a prophet, you need to return his wife and he'll pray for you. And Abimelech treats Abraham really well, even though he's quite offended. He treats Abraham really well, the whole prophet thing, remember? And Abimelech makes reparations with Sarah. Yeah. So he gives 1,000 shekels of silver to vindicate her. He gives it back. Okay, chapter 21. This is about Isaac's conception and birth. So Sarah names the child Isaac, meaning laughter.
Yeah, right.
Laughter, because they both laughed. Hagar and Ishmael actually get sent away because Ishmael is being aggressive with Isaac. God rescues Ishmael again. Anyway, in Genesis chapter 22, God tests Abraham by asking him to sacrifice Isaac.
Right. This is the big one. And I know some people have asked whether or not Isaac knew what was happening. And we don't really know for sure, but I think the book of Jasher has a pretty good reasonable...
Which is Jewish tradition.
Yep.
Ancient Jewish tradition.
Yeah. And it says that Abraham told Isaac while they were going up the mountain what was going to happen.
Right.
And Isaac agreed to it, and they both wept together about it as they went up the mountain. Yeah. So it was like a test of faith, not just for Abraham, unbeknown to Isaac, poor guy, right? But actually test of faith for both Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah.
And they both went up the mountain, and Isaac was willingly participant in this whole process, which I think makes a lot more sense.
It makes a lot more sense.
Especially when you get into the New Testament, about, as you said, I know beforehand, living your body like a living sacrifice.
Yeah, it definitely relates. Paul, the Apostle Paul, had to have been thinking about this.
Yeah.
When he wrote Romans 12.
Right.
Now, therefore, brothers, in view of this great gift of God, offer yourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. So this idea of being willing to sacrifice your will, to sacrifice your lifestyle, to be willing to die to yourself in that way and live for God. And this is essentially what God is telling Abraham and Isaac is that you need to be obedient to me, but you will live.
Right.
You need to sacrifice yourself to me in a sense. But I don't want you to die. I want you to live. And also God showing Abraham and Isaac in that moment, I am your provider.
Right.
I provide the sacrifice for you, right? Which was very opposite of the other pagan gods, where in order to get spiritual power, people were providing them with sacrifices, with food, with things like that. Whereas God's like, no. I provide for you.
Right.
You live for me.
So 180, yeah.
I provide for you.
Right.
So It's actually a really cool chapter if you take time to understand it.
Yes, for sure.
If you don't take time to understand it, it's just offensive. So,
yeah.
But I mean, what
so
isn't?
goes life.
So goes life.
We don't care about anything. Yeah.
Okay, a couple more chapters here. Genesis chapter 23 is the death of Sarah. Abraham buys a plot of land near the city of Hebron that has a burial cave, a cave that he uses, the cave of Machpelah, as a burial cave. In Genesis chapter 24, and old Abraham sends a servant to go back to his family land back in Haran, back in the city of Haran, go find a wife for Isaac. And through a miraculous series of events, the servant finds Rebekah, and she agrees to come back and marry Isaac. And the last chapter we're going to be looking at today, Genesis chapter 25, this is the death of Abraham is recorded. Here is where we learn about after Sarah died. He actually married again a woman named Keturah, and he had 6 other sons to whom he gave gifts, and he actually sent away. He's like, here's a bunch of money. Here's a bunch of your inheritance. Now go away and establish yourself in other lands, because this land, the land of Canaan, is going to the descendants of Isaac specifically. Isaac and Ishmael bury Abraham in the cave of Machpelah, and then we get the account of Ishmael's family line. And also in Genesis chapter 25, just to squeeze a little bit more in, we're told that Isaac's wife, Rebekah, has twin boys, Jacob and Esau. Jacob, it's prophesied to Rebekah while she's pregnant that the younger twin will be the ruler over the second twin. Or I should say the oldest twin won't be as prominent as the younger twin. And sure enough, still in Genesis chapter 25, Jacob buys Esau's birthright for a pot of stew. So Esau doesn't really care about his birthright.
And what's interesting about him not caring is that the word used is despised or hated.
Yes.
Right.
And why this birthright was important is because it was the covenant birthright of Abraham.
Yeah.
And Abraham taught that to Isaac.
Right.
So Isaac would have taught that
to them. They're old enough now to know.
Esau and Jacob. And Esau was like, yeah, whatever.
Kind of sounds like a really dramatic kid. What am I? I'm going to die.
I'm going to die so hungry. I don't care about this stupid birthright.
Yeah.
And so he lost it.
Yeah.
He lost the birthright to Jacob. So there we go. There's going to be a lot more about Jacob and Esau next week.
Right.
A lot more. Do you have anything else you want to say?
No, I think that's it. I think we pretty much covered it.
Okay, so thanks for recapping this week with us. If you have any comments or questions, please pop them down in the comments below. And again, if you're looking for a shorter, slightly more in-depth recap, there's also going to be a link to that in the description box. Until next week, I hope you have a really good week. I hope you are able to stay up with your reading, and I'll see you later. Thank you so much for watching. We want to keep producing high-quality biblical content, but we can't do it without your support. If you feel called to support us, please click the link in the description under Donate. Your support really means a lot to us.